On a dark, rain-slick street, red and blue lights flash against the cold pavement. A black man stands with his hands raised, the metallic click of a gun hammer echoing in the tense silence. But this isn't an ordinary man. This is a decorated FBI agent returning home after cracking one of the biggest cases of his career. Yet in this moment, none of that matters. To the uniformed officer gripping the gun with trembling rage, all he sees is the color of his skin. The air thickens with danger as the officer's finger edges closer to the trigger, when suddenly, headlights cut through the night. A car door slams and the chief himself storms forward, fury in his eyes. The city was restless, its nights painted with sirens, flashing lights, and whispers of crime. Among the chaos, one man worked tirelessly to protect the very people who often failed to see his worth. Agent Marcus Daniels was not just any FBI agent, he was one of the Bureau's most decorated. With years of undercover work, countless busts, and a reputation for chasing truth at all costs, he had built a career on saving lives. Yet despite all his medals and commendations, he carried a quiet burden. The knowledge that his skin color often spoke louder than his badge. Marcus had just closed one of the biggest cases in the city, a high-profile bust that brought down a dangerous criminal network. That night, exhausted but proud, he drove through the familiar streets on his way home. His suit was still pressed from the briefing, his credentials tucked safely in his pocket. He looked like a man of authority, but to some, appearances could never outweigh prejudice. The neighborhood he passed through was notorious for tension between police and locals. Marcus had walked those same blocks before, not as an agent, but as a boy growing up under the watchful eyes of parents who had constantly reminded him to stay cautious, stay respectful, stay alive. And even with all his achievements, that lesson never left him. It was past midnight when flashing headlights caught his attention in the rearview mirror. A patrol car had been tailing him, edging closer, its siren suddenly erupting into the night. Marcus pulled over calmly, reaching instinctively for his badge. To him, this was routine, until he saw the officer approaching, hand already on his gun. Something told Marcus this was not going to be routine at all. The officer's footsteps were heavy against the pavement, echoing in the still night. His hand never left his holster as he barked, "Step out of the car, now." The words were laced not with authority but with hostility, sharp enough to slice through the quiet air. Marcus kept his voice steady, calm. He had been trained for situations like this, but he never imagined that his training would be needed to protect himself from the very people sworn to uphold the law. Slowly, he rolled down the window, both hands visible on the steering wheel. "Officer, I'm a federal agent," he began, his voice measured. But the officer's eyes narrowed with suspicion instead of softening with understanding. "Out of the car," the officer repeated, his tone rising as if Marcus's explanation was nothing more than noise. Reluctantly, Marcus stepped onto the street, the cool night air hitting him like a wave. He moved carefully, his badge and ID ready in his hand. Yet instead of looking at them, the officer drew his gun, pointing it directly at Marcus's chest. Time seemed to stop. The glare of the headlights lit up Marcus's face, exposing the disbelief etched in his eyes. He had stopped hardened criminals, disarmed men twice his size, and stared danger in the face countless times, but nothing compared to the sting of standing defenseless in front of a man who saw only the color of his skin. "Don't move," the officer shouted, his finger hovering dangerously over the trigger. A small crowd began to gather, their murmurs rising with each passing second. Some pulled out their phones, recording what was quickly becoming more than a routine stop. Marcus's heart raced, but his mind stayed sharp. He knew a single wrong move could cost him his life. He tried again. "Check my credentials." "I am an FBI agent." He held his badge forward, the metallic glint catching the streetlight. But instead of looking, the officer swiped it to the ground with the barrel of his gun. The gesture wasn't just reckless, it was humiliating. Every second felt like a lifetime. The crowd gasped as the officer shoved Marcus against the hood of his car, cuffing him with unnecessary force. His suit tore at the seams, his dignity shredded with it. For Marcus, the handcuffs were more than metal. They were chains of a history that never seemed to loosen its grip. And then, just when the tension was at its peak, red and blue lights filled the block once more. Another car had arrived. The crowd parted as a commanding figure stepped out. Chief Ramirez, the officer's superior, pushed through with a face carved in anger and disbelief. He had received a call about an escalating stop, but he hadn't expected this. In that moment, the air was electric. The officer stood frozen, his gun still pointed, his hand trembling slightly. Marcus, though shackled, stood tall, eyes locked on the man who had stripped him of respect in front of strangers. The crowd waited, silent, knowing something explosive was about to happen. Chief Ramirez stormed forward, his boots pounding against the pavement like thunder. The crowd instinctively fell silent. All eyes locked on the confrontation that was about to unfold. His sharp gaze scanned the scene. A black man in cuffs, his badge tossed carelessly to the ground, and one of his own officers standing with a gun still aimed at the man's chest. The fury in the chief's eyes was unmistakable. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice cut through the night like a blade. The officer flinched but didn't lower his weapon. "Sir," he wouldn't comply. "He's dangerous." "Dangerous?" Chief Ramirez's voice cracked with disbelief. He stooped down, picked up the badge from the pavement and held it high for the crowd to see. "This man is Special Agent Marcus Hill, FBI. He's on our side." His words reverberated, making the officer's excuse crumble into dust. Gasps erupted from the onlookers. Some whispered, others shook their heads in disgust. The injustice had been exposed in the harsh glow of the flashing lights. Marcus, still handcuffed, stood motionless, his chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. For him, vindication didn't erase the humiliation of being treated as less than human. The sting of the officer's prejudice clung to him like smoke. The chief didn't hesitate. He grabbed the officer by the shoulder, ripping the gun from his hands. Then, in one fluid motion, he reached for the badge pinned proudly on the officer's chest. With the eyes of the crowd watching, Chief Ramirez yanked it off, the metallic snap echoing louder than any siren. "You've disgraced this department," Ramirez thundered. "You don't deserve to wear this badge another second." The officer's face turned pale, his authority stripped away before the very people he had sought to dominate. He opened his mouth to protest, but the chief's glare silenced him. In that charged silence, Marcus's cuffs were finally removed. The weight lifted from his wrists, but the scars of the moment, emotional and historical, remained carved deeper than any bruise. The crowd erupted in applause, some shouting words of support for Marcus, others jeering at the fallen officer. Yet Marcus said nothing. His silence was louder than any speech, a reminder that justice, when delayed, always comes with a cost. The officer, now stripped of his badge, was escorted away under the same flashing lights he once hid behind. But this time those lights didn't symbolize his authority. They exposed his downfall. For the first time, the community saw accountability right before their eyes. Marcus stood there, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had left faint red marks. The humiliation he endured was still fresh, but so was the undeniable proof that truth had prevailed. He wasn't just any man wrongly accused, he was a federal agent who knew all too well what it meant to be judged by the color of his skin instead of the weight of his credentials. "Chief?" Ramirez placed a hand firmly on Marcus's shoulder. "I can't undo what happened tonight," he said with quiet gravity. "But I promise you, this department will not tolerate racism. Not from anyone wearing this uniform." His words, though heavy, carried the authority of someone determined to make change. In the days that followed, the incident rippled far beyond that street corner. The footage captured by bystanders spread online within hours. Millions watched in disbelief as the video showed a decorated FBI agent nearly shot and wrongfully arrested by someone who swore an oath to protect and serve. The fallout was immediate. Protests surged, demanding reform. Conversations about systemic racism in policing reignited with raw urgency. The disgraced officer became a symbol, not of one man's prejudice, but of a much deeper problem that could no longer be ignored. As for Marcus, he chose not to retreat into silence. He began speaking at community forums, sharing his experience not with bitterness but with resolve. "If this can happen to me, a federal agent in broad daylight, it can happen to anyone. Change isn't optional, it's survival." His words inspired both civilians and honest officers alike, sparking a dialogue that couldn't be silenced. Weeks later, Marcus returned to that same street corner. This time it wasn't under police lights. Children rode bikes nearby, families walked freely, and the tension that once gripped the air had been replaced with a quiet sense of awareness. He paused, reflecting on how one night had exposed so much. The fight against prejudice was far from over. But moments like these, where truth stripped away lies, proved that progress, though slow, was possible, and as he walked away, his head held high. One question lingered, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed the story unfold. If justice can be denied so easily to those sworn to uphold it, how safe are the rest of us when silence takes the place of action?